Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic, and I'm here with my co-host, the audacious Ruthie Blum. Hi, Ruthie.
Hi, Mark. The measured Mark, may I say. Mark, I think we need to jump right in to what happened this morning, though it's been happening day in and day out, bombardment from Lebanon, from Hezbollah in Lebanon. But this morning there was sirens over the whole Tel Aviv area. It was the first time that they'd sent a missile that far.
Correct, and it caused sirens across what Israelis called Gush Dan, which is the greater Tel Aviv area. And it's the first time in a long time that we've had sirens in Tel Aviv, if I'm not mistaken. And it was one missile launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon towards Gush Dan. Where were you at the time? Did it wake you up?
It woke me up. I was supposed to sleep another hour, but I was woken up by the sirens. And I can't say I was surprised. I mean, at first I was a little surprised. But the first question we all ask is, wait, was that from Gaza? Was that from Lebanon? Was that from Yemen? Was that from Iraq? That's the first thing. It was like, and this is the insanity.
It could be from multiple
fronts,
yeah.
And that's the insanity. Okay, so quickly it was determined. I mean, right away.
Let's go back to Ruthie personally. You're asleep. Instead of being woken up by your alarm clock, you're woken up by a siren, correct?
That's right.
And you have to go to a secure area. Where's your secure area?
Well, the secure area is right inside my apartment in a hallway that has no outside walls, windows. So it's common space. You meet your neighbors there.
No.
I won't go to the common space because the common space is the stairwell. And on October 7th at night, a rocket from Gaza, from Hamas in Gaza, hit the building next door to me, and all the windows in my building smashed. And so I will not go into a stairwell that is mainly windows. So I stay inside my apartment in a hallway, an inner hallway. And I stood there thinking, okay, here we go again, but maybe we don't know. But I will say, and I will reiterate what I've said all along. Tel Aviv should not be treated differently from any northern city or town. They've been living like this for almost a full year. And the idea that somehow, a rocket went over Tel Aviv, this should not be something
I'll tell you what
special.
I think is different. It's not because it's Tel Aviv, but it's the question is, what proportion of the Israeli civil population is on the receiving end of rockets? Because citizens' lives in the north are the same as citizens' lives in the center of the country as the same as citizens' lives in the south. But there's a difference. Everyone's equal. But there's a difference whether 3 million people are under rocket attack or 200,000 people are under rocket attack. It's a difference in the nature of the threat. But if you told your story, I'll tell you mine. This morning, I live in Modi'in, not in Tel Aviv. And no sirens this morning in Modi'in. I heard about the attack on Tel Aviv in the radio when I was out doing my morning. I do these power walks to stay in shape. And it reminded me that a week and a half ago, there was a missile that actually we had sirens in Modi'in. And I was outside. When you're at home, I think it's easier because everyone has in their mind where they go to when there's a missile strike, and you know in advance what you're going to do. Because I was outside, there's a microsecond of confusion. What do I do? And there was, on a recent strike, there was someone who was driving, and actually they killed themselves because they didn't know what to do, and apparently there was an accident or something. I was walking, luckily, past, I'm not the same side of the street, but there was near a building, and I just went into there. I went to the building into there. What's it called? You call it
a stairwell?
Stairwell. I went into a stairwell and I waited the compulsory 10 minutes and I went back to my walk. And that was, you are correct in what you said before, that was a rocket launched by the Houthis in Yemen.
Right. And it actually hit in Modi'in, where you live. It hit the train station. I mean, shrapnel from it hit. And I just want to add one thing before we move on, and that is that people say, oh, shrapnel, just cover your head if you're outside and all that, and be careful because of the shrapnel. You should see that shrapnel. It looks like full rocket size.
But some of it is from the missile the bad guys shot. But some of it is often they tell us
interception.
It's the interceptors. When they destroy the rocket, they fall and they can cause damage.
But when they intercept the rocket, sometimes pieces of the rocket also fall down. They're huge and they're heavy. And I think, you know what? If I had just lying there with my hands over my head, I can't imagine that some of those big pieces of shrapnel, if it hit me in the hands that I would be able to protect my head. I don't know. I follow orders, as do most instructions, as do most Israelis.
Yeah.
But I'd like to say something now about this whole thing that's a war. It's been a war for a year with the North, but we haven't called it a war, nor are we calling it a war right now. We've given it a name, Operation Northern Arrows. Okay. Now, I don't care about these names, but this is I guess we don't call it a full-fledged war until there are troops on the ground. And right now we've been doing everything from the air. We've done it so successfully.
Except, no, I'm going to interrupt you with your permission.
Yes.
When you say we've been doing everything from the air, there are those who are saying that Israel was behind certain beeper attacks or pager attacks, depending which were.
And then the next day, walkie-talkie attacks.
And the next day, walkie-talkie attacks.
Yes.
And in fact, let's look at last week, because we did our podcast last week. It was the day immediately following the beeper pager attack.
That's right.
And I'll talk about that more in a moment with your permission. Then the next day, there was the walkie-talkie explosions. Both of them were attributed to Israel, and official Israel says nothing. The day after that, Hassan Nasrallah gives this big speech in Beirut telling him, the world how bad the Israelis are, as per usual, standard Nasrallah lines. Though he did admit that Hezbollah had suffered a major blow, which is nice to hear, that he admits it publicly. Maybe he had no choice. But
No, I'll tell you what he did. It was clever. It's unusual for him to say Israel has more technology than we do.
Yeah.
But what he said was, Israel has better technology because it's backed by the United States and Europe or something like that.
Yeah.
In other words, he attributed it not to Israel.
Correct, yes. He has to make excuses. It can't be the Jews themselves being smart, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, we had on Tuesday the beepers, on Wednesday the walkie-talkies. Then on Thursday, Nasrallah gives this big speech, and we do a piece of, and this we owned, yes, we didn't deny knowledge of it. Thursday, when he, in the middle of his speech.
Oh, that's right.
We fly over Beirut, and the Israeli pilots deliberately break the sonic boom and causes huge sound, breaking the sound barrier over Beirut. And that's sending a message, you can talk until you want, but we have control over the skies. And then on the Friday, before the Shabbat came in, I have to tell our Orthodox viewers and listeners, the IDF took out a very, very senior Hamas commander and his whole command structure, the senior leaders of what it ultimately is Hezbollah's shock troops. And these
15 of them.
15 of them. And supposedly they were planning ground attacks on northern communities in Israel based on what Hamas did on October 7th in the south. So we had 4 great events for Israel, one after the other.
Correct.
And I have to tell you that I think I speak for most Israelis. After going through what happened on October 7th, where there was an Israeli screw-up after an Israeli screw-up, and they caught us with our pants down, intelligence didn't give us a warning, mistake after mistake, and we paid for those mistakes. But it's nice it's like I grew up with Entebbe, right? The famous Israeli rescue operation in 1976. Right? It's like Israel last week returned to being what we can do and what we know we do best. And I was proud to be an Israeli.
Oh, I agree completely. I mean, the feeling among Israelis I know, by the way, on all sides of the political spectrum, other than the anti-Zionists, we were saying, we're back. Okay, that was the feeling. And it was exhilarating. And I know that people who hate Israel will use the word exhilarating and say that we're happy to kill people. Well, I would like to add, I'm always happy to kill bloodthirsty mass murderers. Yes, I admit it. Now, we also have kept civilian casualties to a minimum the best we can. And one of the ways we do that is that we announce to the people in Lebanon, as we did to the people in Gaza, get out of the way, move out of the way. You have rocket launchers in your apartment building. You have this, you have that. Get out of the way. We're about to bomb. And they are listening. They're heeding it. Now, of course, as Hamas did in Gaza, Hezbollah is trying to keep them from leaving because Hezbollah doesn't care about Lebanese civilians. Let's get this straight. They are happy to have a lot of casualties so that the international community will blame Israel, and which is, of course, what's happening. as we speak at the United Nations right now. And that's part of their strategy. The difference between Lebanon and Gaza is that whereas in Gaza, most of the people supported Hamas or participated with Hamas, etc. In Lebanon, it's not so. No, not everybody is. And in fact, the Lebanese are very angry at Hezbollah for starting this whole thing and having this tit for tat, these attacks. The Lebanese people don't want it. Their economy is in the toilet as it is. They didn't start this. They didn't want it. And by the way, interestingly enough, even Iran seems to be upset that Hezbollah has now done something that is actually giving us legitimacy to take out as many rocket launchers, etc. And Hezbollah has Iran's soldiers to protect its nuclear program.
Correct. The whole point, over the last 2 decades, Iran has channeled billions into Lebanon to build up a forward post. I think the best comparison is when the Soviets put missiles in Cuba in the early 1960s, right? They wanted to build up a formidable military machine in Lebanon, right on Israel's border. And the idea was that if we ever decided that we would move against Iran's nuclear facilities, that we would have to face the consequences of literally hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets coming from the north, because this was Iran's forward force. And you are right. I've heard people say this. It's been all over the media the last couple of days, that Iran doesn't want to see that great investment it's made in building up this proxy army, right? This Iranian proxy army inside Lebanon. They want to save it for when they need it. They don't want it to go to the Palestinians. They don't want Hezbollah to use it now. From their point of view, it's an asset that they've built up, and they want to use it when they want to use it, and not when Palestinians or Lebanese decide they want to use it. From a Lebanese perspective, and I think even in the Shia community in Lebanon, do they really want war and destruction and all that will involve because Hezbollah decides because of its... I mean, think of it. Hezbollah, often when people think of a terrorist organization, they think about, a few people with a Kalashnikov, maybe an RPG. People don't understand Hezbollah is stronger than the Lebanese state. It's stronger than the Lebanese army. It's not even a state within a state. It's like there's Hezbollah and there's this impotent Lebanese state, a failed state. As you said, it's an economy, I'm quoting now economy in the toilet, right? A political structure that's totally dysfunctional. And Hezbollah is the force. And Lebanon will go to war or not to war, not by the democratic representatives of the Lebanese people, but by this pro-Iranian terrorist organization. And the ultimate irony, as you've said correctly, is it possible that Iran could actually be putting its foot on the brakes? That one of the reasons we haven't seen total escalation, and let's be clear, we could do much more. We have the ability to do much more, and Hezbollah has the ability to do much more. The reason we haven't seen a total out-of-control escalation is because Hezbollah is hearing from its Iranian patrons, maybe it's not the right time.
Absolutely. And I think I'd like to make a point that maybe a lot of people don't realize about Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah chief. He does not care about Lebanon. Though he is Lebanese, you could say, he doesn't care about Lebanon. And he says he cares about the Islamic Caliphate. He cares about Shia Islam. And this is very reminiscent of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who came back from exile in 1979 to Iran. And when he got off the plane, again, I'm going to paraphrase, but he basically said that. They said, oh, you're back in Iran, you're home in Iran. He said, I don't care about Iran. I care about Islam. I care about the Islamic
revolution,
and spreading Islam around the world. So why is that important? Because he doesn't care. It's not just that he doesn't care about the Lebanese people. He doesn't care about people in any borders. What he cares about is the Islamic Caliphate. And that's now Iran also, that's true. But here we go. If we've shown Hezbollah that we can track them and we can target them, they didn't think so, because for the last year we've been dealing with Gaza and somehow appearing to them as though we just aren't capable of dealing with them, especially not while we're fighting in Gaza, and especially since we haven't returned all the hostages and we haven't located Sinwar in Gaza. So they really thought they'll just keep this little war of attrition going and we'll sort of retaliate a little bit. But now we mean business. Now we've turned our sights to the north, and it turns out we know a lot more than they thought. But more importantly, here's their other dilemma. They have very long-range weapons, and a lot of those they're keeping in the north of Lebanon, not in southern Lebanon. And if they dare to use those, well, then northern Lebanon is fair game for us.
Of course.
And then Iran won't be happy. And then, because again, those are the weapons that Iran needs them to use to protect the nukes.
100%. I was hearing this morning on the international media, this sort of discussion. We've got to de-escalate and go for a diplomatic solution. And I would remind the people who listen to that sort of analysis that, on the contrary, if you want a diplomatic solution, you have to create the political and strategic realities that facilitate that. And by hitting Hezbollah the way we are, in a very calibrated way, but in a way that really hurts them, we are help making the possibility of a political diplomatic solution more realistic. Because Hezbollah is not going to pull out of southern Lebanon, and that's what the Israeli demand is. What does Israel say? We want to create a situation so our citizens in the north, tens of thousands of people who've been dislocated and left their homes for a year now, yes, that they can return to their homes in safety. And the government says that will be achieved when Hezbollah understands that you don't attack Israel and that Hezbollah is not physically in the border area in southern Lebanon. And so far, Hezbollah has said no to any such proposal. These sort of calibrated attacks, where we are surgically taking out Hezbollah capabilities, I believe every time we're doing something that's hurting them and we're ratcheting it up, I think this has more of a chance than any other strategy in getting what we want and ultimately facilitating a new security reality in the South, which will be based on understandings reached, which we've talked about this before, we'll have to be ready to enforce those to make sure they don't break those understandings. But there's no contradiction between the desire to reach a political settlement, an agreed settlement, a new reality. These sorts of attacks that Israel has been doing will help it get us there.
Okay, so I agree with you. I just think that your language is a little too diplomatic, as you know. And first of all, this is the way I see it. You're absolutely right, but I would use the word victory and defeat and pulverize, words like that, which is to say that, and I would say, a diplomatic agreement. Yes, all wars end with an agreement. But we've got to stop treating this as though somehow that diplomacy is an end in itself. No, the end should be our victory, their defeat, their capitulation, not ours. And then we dictate the terms, not they. Up until now, what did we have? And by the way, it is the height of chutzpah that the UN General, Secretary General, is very concerned about what's happening in southern Lebanon, and he's very concerned, and UNIFIL is very concerned. Excuse me, where have you been for 18 years when you were supposed to be guarding the border? You're concerned? You didn't do your job? You let them build tunnels and amass rockets?
Violation of a UN Security Council resolution.
So we don't believe. So you know what? So forget those resolutions, okay? What we need is victory. What we need is to pummel. Now, in my opinion, what we did, okay, again, allegedly with the pagers and the thing, and then not allegedly we took out these leaders, and now we are using the Air Force to target all the launchers and the missiles and all this. And I'm saying that this is the precursor, has to be, okay, I don't have inside information from the IDF, has to be the precursor to the next step are tanks. And the final one are soldiers, foot soldiers on the ground, as we have in Gaza. I don't see any other choice. And what you need to have is those terrorists begging for some kind of deal, not where we say, okay, we'll stop. This has been our problem all along. We don't know how to fight an enemy that is not only, there are experts in Israel who say, we still haven't learned how to speak Arabic. But I would say, yes, we do. But we still live in a semi-fantasy world that if we can contain something, then we can stop. Okay, let's all stop. No. we have to pulverize them. We have to make them cower. And we have to do the same in Gaza. And by the way, the more we do that, the greater the chance of getting the hostages back from Gaza is.
So once again, maybe we don't disagree on big pictures, but I think in the end there's going to have to be some sort of arrangement. That arrangement will be more advantageous to us if we have the military victories that we need on the way.
It should be only advantageous to us. Why should it be?
No, but there are different levels. It's often in the real world, it's not black or white. There are different areas of grey, and we want it closer to the positive side than the negative side. But I will say this. I agree that a ground incursion into southern Lebanon could well be necessary. It could well even be desirable, because we want, when this is over, and this is what the government has articulated, the political leadership, the military leadership, that the southern Lebanon will be free from Hezbollah. And so we have to maybe go in on the ground. There are some things you can do by air, but other things you need to be there. If we have to blow up bunkers and destroy weapons, maybe only boots on the ground can do that. And that might be a necessary element in a final new reality. And also, often that can also help, though. We have to be aware as Israelis. You've got a son who's about to be called up again for reserve duty. I've got friends and family and people I know serving, yes. There will be casualties, Israeli casualties. As we had them last time we went into Lebanon, we'll have them again this time. But it's a price, I believe, that needs to be paid. We have to do that operation because you can even facilitate democracy, because if you're there, you say, well, we pull out under these conditions. In other words, we have to be ready if we need to send in those ground forces.
Right, and by the way, that was what we did not do in Gaza. We didn't do it in Lebanon properly in 2006, and we didn't do it in Gaza properly each time we'd been in there and out of there, again, because of our belief in a few things. One is we don't like war. We don't like killing people. We don't like killing our people. We don't like killing other people. Trouble is, our enemies have the opposite strategy. That's one thing. That's one of the reasons. The other is that we have this fantasy that there's this thing called the West that is supporting us, and the White House and State Department, which do support us to some extent. And the extent is, and I don't mean about supplying weapons. We purchase those weapons, and they America
often with
gets
American
a lot of
aid. Be fair.
All right, it's circular. However, the reason that I've been disgusted all this time is that it's one thing to say, we support your right to defend yourself, but it depends how you do it. Okay. Now, no, it doesn't. You know why it doesn't depend how we do it? Because that presupposes that we do something wrong, illegitimate. And you know very well that we never do. If anything, we're too careful with enemies like that. That is one thing. And if we don't do something now, and I have to say, if we don't, we won't have deterrence. And you say we may have casualties and soldiers. Yeah. Of course, but that's why what we're doing is cleaning out the area, cleaning it out. And then it makes our soldiers less at risk.
First of all, you're right. We have to go for military victories here. But I want there to be something in your mind which needs to be in the back of the mind of Israeli decision makers. We had a war in Lebanon in 1982, and it wasn't a total success story for Israel. How's that for diplomatic language? We had another war with Lebanon in 2006, and it was also not a great success story for Israel. Lebanon is a very combustible place. People, when America was involved in Vietnam, they talked about the Vietnamese quagmire, that you sink in the mud, and so to speak. So Lebanon is all sorts of challenges for Israel from a military point of view and also from a political point of view. And that's why I'm applauding the government, because I think what we've done up until now has been very calibrated, very selective, very clever. And if and when, and I presume it's more when, we send in our ground forces, we also have to be it's like a game of chess. You have to think 4 or 5 moves ahead, not to repeat possible mistakes that we made in previous rounds of fighting. So far, I see no evidence that we are, but I'm saying that caution, that historical memory shouldn't prevent us from doing what we need to do, but should prevent us from making the mistakes.
Well, absolutely. I'll tell you, in 2006, it's interesting because this is said of all armies, that generals usually fight the last war, not the next one. Of course, because that's what you know, right, is your last war. But in 2006, we were taken totally, those poor soldiers in the north, our soldiers, they were sent into battle. Their equipment was no good. The tank commanders often hadn't yet trained on the specific tanks they had, because our idea was that the era of ground forces and tanks is over. It was a lie. It wasn't true. I don't mean a lie. It wasn't purposeful. Okay. It was, as we say, the conceptia, part of this whole idea that technology and the Air Force and all this is gonna make that unnecessary. We won't need tanks and soldiers. Of course, we discovered that's not true, and we've had to adjust in this war. Now, I would like to say one thing. I think what I'd like to do is wrap this up with what I've been hearing since for this whole week. If we're such geniuses when we put our minds to it. We have such amazing intelligence. We have the Mossad is great, the Shin Bet is great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How, with all that genius, did we miss October 7th?
Huge Israeli screw-up. You can't sugarcoat this. October 7th is an Israeli disaster. Multiple disasters that made a huge disaster. And they caught us without preparation. They caught us unready. They from their perspective.
How? With all this great intelligence.
So it's a whole. There were military mistakes. There were intelligence mistakes. It happened on the watch of this government, and so this government also has to answer a lot of difficult questions. Can I change back to Lebanon, though?
You may.
Maybe I'm running away from it.
No, you're not. It's relevant for the continuation
of the war. Well, if we can continue what we did last week and this week so far with the same resilience, with the same initiative, and with the same innovation, yes, I think we'll be doing well. I wanted to you talked about American support a moment ago, and I'm more complimentary to the Americans than you are.
I've noticed.
Yes, maybe because you're an American citizen and therefore you feel you expect more or something. And I'm more modest, and I think the Biden administration, I thank President Biden for coming here in the first month of the war and standing in solidarity. I thank them for all the munitions. I thank them for the diplomatic support of the UN. I thank them. I thank them for the money that they gave us, emergency funding, the Congress, right? But I tell you what has disturbed me this last couple of days. The former head of the CIA, former Defense Secretary of the United States, former Chief of Staff of the White House, Leon Panetta, was a man that I actually respected. He came out with this comment that he said Israel did the Beeper attacks. And I'm not saying he's right or wrong. Let's presume that he's, for the sake of argument, that it was Israel. He said, to quote him, I'm quoting directly, and we checked the quote before getting on to do this episode of our podcast. He said the Beeper attacks were a form of terrorism. And that demands that I presume you as well, it demands, especially when a figure who was the former Secretary of Defense, the former head of the CIA, and in the CIA, he was doing all the dirty tricks that America needs to do to stay safe. Yes, that was his job.
Let me tell you, the CIA was woke also back in the day. Okay. And when I studied.
I'll leave that away.
Okay.
I'll leave that aside at this point. But what I'm saying, look, Israel somehow, apparently, if you believe what's been written, yes, infiltrated. Hezbollah ordered the beepers, because they know cell phones are penetrable by, electronic intelligence and so forth. They ordered the beepers because it was supposed to be safer communication for their military personnel. That's why they ordered the beepers, that Israel could somehow, apparently, allegedly, according to what we've read in the press, infiltrate the supply chain and have these beepers explode, where the people carrying the beepers
were only terrorists.
Were terrorists, and this is part of they bought these thousands of beepers as a military procurement for the communication system of a military terrorist organization. To say that this is terrorism, what is terrorism? Terrorism is to deliberately target innocent civilians for political or religious reasons, right? What's that got to do?
No, this
is not target. This is
was an act of counterterrorism.
Exactly.
Not terrorism.
It's an act of counterterrorism.
Okay.
It is surgical. It's against military targets. There was some collateral damage, but very, very minute. I think the United States, when it does its military operations, it would pray and hope to achieve the low levels of collateral damage that we achieved in that operation. And yet, he uses this language, and it makes me wonder sometimes. I hope Panetta thinks very carefully about what he said, because I would ask him the following. If it would have been possible before 9/11 to infiltrate the Al-Qaeda communication system, then maybe that was before cell phones were everywhere. But if they really could, if you had blown up their beepers and prevented them from doing 9/11, that would also be terrorism. Let's be clear.
I got to tell you, I hate to say this, but a lot of times when we say if America did it, let me tell you something. In America, the left in America also says America shouldn't do it. So it's not like, oh yeah, that's right. You'll hear Americans say, absolutely, we committed terrorism in Vietnam and in this and in that in Afghanistan. You can listen to Americans on the left, but I don't even want to get into that argument. What I will say is that you're much more delicate. I know you're angry at Panetta. A, I'm not surprised. B, I would have used much more foul language at him and about him, but that's because I'm less delicate than you are.
So let's save some of that foul language for next week. Ruthie, pleasure talking to you. And if we had good news this last week, let's hope we also have more good news when we meet again for our next podcast.
Praying. And what we call good news is victory, not defeat.
And making Israel safer, more secure.
That's right.
Look after yourself, Ruthie.
You too, Mark.